Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome back. Access to Democracy. Alan Miller here with a return guest, a multiple return guest, Representative Paul Thissen from District 61B,
right,
who is now a candidate for governor.
That's right. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. We have so many candidates for governor on the Democratic side that I understand for a baseball game, we would have all positions filled.
We're getting close, yes. Yeah. A hockey team at least right now. Yes, that's right.
Now you've gone through 8 really elections in terms of the House. I don't know. You have retained your youth. I haven't during that period of time. I can't figure it out. But and you're just back from Italy.
Yeah. From a trip. It was very nice, yeah.
You've been a leader of the House, certainly majority leader, or Speaker of the House.
Right.
You decided you want to throw your hat in again with the governor stepping down. What made you decide?
Well, a couple of things. The biggest thing for me, and I thought long and hard about this since the last election and kind of where the state is headed, where the country's headed, what role I can play in all of that. And, to me, the things that I've been always working on at the legislature have been these issues around the economic squeeze that families are feeling. And I still think that that is the fundamental issue that we need to take on as a state. And, there's all these forces out there, a lot of which are truly outside people's control, in some sense outside the state's control. But I think we need a governor who's going to be willing to stand up and stand with the people of Minnesota and fight back against some of those forces, and at least even the playing field a little bit. And I think as I look back on my legislative service, particularly my time in leadership and as Speaker, I think we actually made some very significant strides in that direction. And it was by taking a pretty bold, progressive approach to the economy. And I think that that's what we need again in the governor's office. The Governor Dayton has done a strong job of articulating that and standing up for that. But I think we need to take it to the next level. And I think based on my experience and some of the ideas I have, I think I can do that. The other reason is as I go around the state, I see a lot of people, there's a lot of this new energy rising up. The indivisible groups, the Stand Up Minnesota, some of those groups, which I think is fabulous. But there's
we've had some of them on the show.
I'm sure. Yeah. And that's very exciting, but there's more people that are in the other camp who feel like their voice isn't being heard, who feel disempowered, who feel like they don't have a say anymore, control of their own destiny. And I think, in addition to some really smart policy ideas in dealing with this economic squeeze, we need someone that's going to be willing to practice a politics that's about including people. And all the successes that I've been part of in my legislative career have really been about taking energy outside the state capitol, bringing it inside the capitol and translating that into meaningful change for people's lives. And I think we need a governor who knows how to do that, who's willing to do that, and who wants to practice those kind of politics, because I do think that the biggest threat we have to our democracy right now, the biggest threat we have to our future, is people giving up. And we need someone who's willing to stand up and rally people, and I think I can do that.
People giving up led us to the last national election where 100 million people stayed home. And look what we have been enduring for the last 6+ months. With my phraseology is with a madman at the helm. And I won't ask you to comment on that, but it has created such chaos for us as a nation, plus loss of reputation, plus unnerving our allies and all. But here in the state, we've had an unusual year. We had the Republicans, as a result, I think, of that election, having a 1-vote majority in the Senate, which has caused all sorts of problems, and a majority in the House, where you sit. And I know one of the things that you have done and are able to do is to work across the aisle. That seemed to have disappeared this session.
Well, I mean, I think that it depends on the issues, but you have to have a willing negotiating partner, right? And I think the Republicans this last session took the position that if they just held out, if they waited long enough, if they kept things in secret long enough, they'd be able to kind of push Governor Dayton to come along with their positions. And although he stood very firm on a lot of things, if you put enough stuff out there, some stuff is gonna push through. But I really do think one of the, you're hitting on something that's really important, and that is there are these structural problems in our political system. One of which is there's way too much money in our campaigns and elections, and way too much dark money, and that's something we need to do about. But also the way we want to run our legislature right now. It isn't conducive to the kind of conversations between the public and legislators, and then among legislators, because the leadership holds so much power so closely and does all their negotiating behind closed doors. There's just not transparency, there's not public input, and we get bad results as a result. And one of the things that I've been fighting for in the legislature, and want to continue fighting for as governor, is trying to throw open the doors and windows of our legislative process to invite the public back in, because if there's many reasons, but one of the reasons I think people feel like they're not being heard is because they're actually not being heard. They're being shut out, and we need to change that.
We see that in so many aspects of our society. Now, we are here in the 2nd Congressional District, and I see letters and I hear people complaining all the time that we have what I call a stealth candidate, well, a stealth representative now, in Jason Lewis, and nobody can reach him. He doesn't have meetings, he doesn't have town halls, doesn't have anything. And I know that that's also prevalent in the legislature. I might say without a doubt, D-A-U-D-T.
No, I mean, that's right. And, partly it's because they're afraid of, I think, in general, people, when you're willing to be transparent, when you're willing to defend what you're doing. I mean, look at the healthcare debate we've been having in Washington, D.C., where there's been no committee process, where they just kind of launch a new healthcare plan every other day without anybody, including the legislators who are going to vote on it, the Congress people that are going to vote on it, knowing what's going to be in it. It's just no way to conduct a democracy, and we can do much better than that. I mean, one of the things that I did this year, the legislature is not required to be transparent about their communications, their emails and their phone calls and their schedule. We've kind of exempted ourselves from the open meeting laws and from the Data Practices Act here in Minnesota. So I voluntarily opened up those this year because I do think my constituents deserve to know, who I'm corresponding with. A lot of it is with constituents. A lot of it's not that exciting. But, if lobbyists are contacting me, if special interests are contacting me, whoever it is, if other legislators are contacting me, I think my constituents deserve to know that. And so I'll continue to do that.
And certainly it's important to them. You say, some of it may not be important, but to that person, It's very important.
Absolutely.
And, and I know you are very responsive also to your emails. And of course, we have Senator Jim Carlson here,
Yes.
who answers every email, every phone call.
That's right.
And you have, really strived to do the same thing.
Well, it's important.
And what was left undone in this legislative term, which was on its own a chaotic term?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, well, it was actually, I mean, compared to the last 2 years, the previous 2 years, we actually passed some bills, which I suppose is progress. But, so it's kind of not so much what was left undone, but in some sense what was done that concerns me. One of the things that we fought for a lot over the last several years, particularly those 2 years when the Democrats were in charge of the legislature, was actually getting our budget back in structural balance, getting our fiscal house in order. And as a result, we've been able to continue to make investments in education and in healthcare and those kind of things that make a difference to people. Transportation this year only was able to happen because we made some responsible fiscal decisions a couple years ago. But what the Republicans did this year with their tax cut bills was to actually put that at risk again. And I would not be surprised if we come into the legislative session next year with another budget deficit and a structural deficit in the future. I think partly that's by design by the Republicans. But whatever the intention was, it's just not good fiscal management. One other thing that didn't get done, though, that was a big issue for me and that I fought for very hard was internet privacy. The federal government went backwards on kind of protecting United States residents from internet companies taking their data and selling them for a profit without consent. And we tried to make progress here in Minnesota to put a consent requirement into Minnesota law. It passed the House unanimously. It passed the Senate with only one no vote, but then went into conference committee behind closed doors and it disappeared. That's something we need to do. We shouldn't have these big conglomerates, big internet companies, media companies, being able to take our data without our consent and profit from it. I just think that that's wrong, and Minnesota should step forward and protect
I think they
its citizens.
shouldn't even be able to take our data whether they profit or not.
Without our consent. Yes, right.
It's a big privacy issue, which to me is very important.
Absolutely.
And so certainly that's something that's
So I hope
still
to
left
come back
be
next
done.
year and get that piece done.
Now, we mentioned right before we went on the air, you said that the forecast on health care is coming out Monday.
The forecast for premiums for the individual
Yeah.
market is coming out, yes. And, again, I would anticipate that we're going to see another set of increases. If you'll recall last year, or this last legislative session, well, last year we saw these big premium increases. The last legislative session, we put in place some premium relief that was only going to last for 1 year. One of the things we were fighting for, I was fighting for, and others in the legislature, was making sure that the health insurance companies took some responsibility and made some commitments to us about what premiums were going to be in the future. The Republicans refused to go along with that, and so I anticipate we're going to see another significant increase in the individual health market. It is one piece. I supported the Affordable Care Act, and I think we made some good progress in reducing uninsurance rates, helping a lot of people get access to care. But one area where we need to improve on that is in the individual market, and unfortunately, we just haven't seen the kind of progress we need to have, including the inability of the folks in Washington, D.C. to get anything passed.
I don't understand for the life of me why we're the only really civilized country that doesn't have health care for all. Single payer, Medicare for all, whatever it is, that's where we fall down. Certain basic things that I think a society and a government owes to its citizens, healthcare certainly, infrastructure, environment, education, public safety, those are probably the 5 things that I would equate. The Republicans don't feel that way. They're still talking about trickle down. If we have a surplus, they want to give it back to the voters. Well, that's fine, but it's meaningless if you get a $40 check and then the next year you have to cough up more money because the money is not there.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I've worked on these healthcare issues for a long time, and trying to manipulate a system that really is based on the idea. I mean, it really only works economically if some people don't get access to healthcare. We need to get to Medicare for all. That's something I absolutely believe in, and will fight for if I'm elected to be the next governor. And I think we can get there here in Minnesota, because you're right. It is one of those fundamental issues, fundamental rights, that people should be able to see a doctor or a nurse when they need to. And I think most Minnesotans would agree with that proposition.
And not have to worry about their pocketbook, depleting the bank account, having to spend their entire 401 on medical. I mean, it's so detrimental to the health of the economy, not only the health of the individual.
That's absolutely right. And and I think you make a good point. It's all well and good to return taxpayers' money to the taxpayers, and we need to be good fiscal stewards of our money. But the thing that struck me during this session, as we were talking about that, is on the one hand, we had a lot of legislators that were supporting these very significant tax cuts. And remember, these were tax cuts that are largely going to corporations to reduce business property tax or business taxes in general. But while they were supporting those tax cuts, which are sending us into a deficit, at the same time they were bemoaning the fact that that our child care costs are too high, and we can't make the investment to help families kind of help them cover their child care costs. Or we have shortages in our schools, and we see property taxes going up, or referendums failing because we can't offer the kind of because there's not enough money for our schools. So on the one hand, we have people saying we need to give this money back. On the other hand, saying we don't have enough money to pay for these pretty essential services. It seems to me,
which is a no-brainer, really.
Right, and it seems to me, until we get to a place where we don't have these unmet needs that everybody acknowledges, we don't really have a budget surplus. I think it's dangerous, in fact, sometimes for us to be talking about a budget surplus because that just gives you the sense that there's this overwhelming amount of money there, when in fact, again, we need to be good fiscal stewards, but we need to make sure that people have the foundational stuff, the things you talked about, public safety, infrastructure, education, healthcare, to kind of make their lives go. And those are common goods that we should be looking at. Higher education costs is another huge example of where families, do need help.
Yeah, our Attorney General, Lori Swanson, scored a big victory yesterday when the decision came down about these online universities that bled students, not unlike Trump University on a national level, that ended up paying back $25 million. Well, these local outfits, Globe and Minnesota Business, that have been found to be guilty of fraud. Education. I don't understand why people don't realize that we become a better society with an educated citizenry. And if we make it so difficult for them to become educated, they have to pay back until they're 40 years old, as my daughter did, it doesn't benefit, certainly, society.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. If we look at the workforce shortages that are coming up, making sure that we have that productive, engaged citizenry is even more important. These are public goods. These are common goods that we all benefit from, as you said, and we need to see it that way.
We just had the anniversary of the disastrous I-35 bridge. Certainly, we are in much better shape than we were at that time. And it was heartrending, really, to hear some of the survivors talking this week about the bridge collapse. At one point, when Senator Carlson, who is our senator, which is why I've mentioned him several times, walked in here for an interview, he came in with a piece of cement and put it down on the table there. And I said, "What is that?" He says, "Oh, that's from the Lafayette Bridge. They say it doesn't need work yet." Well, just stand underneath it. And of course, the Lafayette Bridge is one of the ones that's being repaired as we speak.
Right.
But we have to be on top of those things.
Well, and the thing is, a generation ago, my parents made those kind of investments. And it is time for this generation, to step up and make the same kind of investments for the next generation. I mean, that's how we do things. That's how we keep things going.
What do we do to overcome the lack of interest in our elections, the voter apathy that we suffered this last election? It cost us in the state. It cost us horribly in the federal government, although I don't know that we have Russians trying to manipulate our election here in Minnesota. But what can we do to stimulate these people to get out there, not sit on their hands? 100 million people in this country didn't vote, and look what we've got for a national government.
Yeah.
And in the state, we still led the country, but we led the country with a much lower percentage than we have in recent elections.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, obviously something I think about a lot. I do think that getting after the campaign finance laws makes a difference. I have witnessed myself in state legislative elections, as leader of the caucus, floods of mail coming in these, competitive districts. I mean, Egan wasn't so much in the last election, but in previous years, this area certainly has been inundated by this mail. And, that part of the effort of that mail is not to convince voters, but to turn them off from politics, right? I mean, that's the reason you put in 5-6 pieces that arrive in a single day. And, so
Take things out of context.
And that take things out of context.
Or just write out false.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So that dark money, getting the money out of politics, I think, getting to publicly financed elections or doing something to be able to address that, I think is important. But I also think we have to look, as politicians, we have to look at ourselves. And, not being, not even kind of making it a Democratic or Republican issue. I have to say that our politics, our kind of social, cultural discussions that we've had, haven't really been talking to, the average mom and dad who's worrying about making sure their kids, can get a good education, can participate in some activities, that they're going to be able to be there around the kitchen table for them when they get home. We haven't been addressing those things. We haven't been talking about that. And we need to do that more. I met a woman recently up in Mora, Minnesota, so kind of up 35. And, she broke down in tears because she had to make a decision. She had 2 kids in school and had to make a decision that only one of her kids could participate in an activity that spring because she didn't have money to pay the fees for both of them. We shouldn't be putting families, we shouldn't be putting parents into that kind of situation, but we don't talk about that kind of stuff enough. And so, and that kind of comes back to, the reason that I have gotten into this race. I mean, those are the issues that I want to talk about with the people of Minnesota.
That's what you said earlier.
Yeah.
We've got to stimulate these people to get them to feel that their voice can be heard.
Yeah.
Not that their voice is lost in the wilderness. Yeah. You've got to, and of course the other side of the coin is we have to stimulate them to get involved.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's right. But you get involved if you think you can make a difference. And, for too often, or for too long, I think that people feel like that's not the case. And it's not just in politics, it's in our economy too. They see decisions being made about their economic futures from thousands of miles away. They see, big kind of corporate decision making that's kind of inhuman anymore. We need to return our economy, we need to return our politics to a more human scale, where we're remembering that, people shouldn't just be judged by their value to a business bottom line. I mean, we're worth so much more than that. People should be, and judged is not even the right word, but people's value should come from their role as a mom and dad and a brother and a sister and a parent, or a son or a daughter, a coach, a member of their church or their synagogue, or their, whatever it is, their mosque. Those are the things that bring value to life. And too often we've gotten away in this country from viewing people's value in that way and more viewing them just as, are you going to raise my bottom line or are you going to not raise my bottom line? And, that's not just about politics, and that's not something that, any governor or legislator is going to ultimately be able to get after, but we should be talking about that because I think it is kind of what's rotting us from inside.
And the rhetoric in the last year nationally has led to a lot of violence. We've got to somehow or other enforce tolerance. I'm sad that we don't teach the social sciences nearly as much in school, the humanities. I taught a course at Inver Hills on the Holocaust and 20th century genocide, but those courses and that course have gone away. And people don't understand. We got to stop them from being insular and really expanding out. Recognize other people, associate with other people.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you about everything you said, and it partly is the rhetoric that people are using. Partly that comes from this fear that people and anxiety that people have. But I talk to my kids about this all the time. They want to watch their videos, which is great. But that literary imagination that you get from reading books, that you get from a liberal arts, a humanities kind of education, where you can put yourself in the shoes of someone else, we have lost that, and we need to get back to that. And that's not an easy answer about how we do that, but part of it is making sure that we are investing in the kind of education and providing the resources, so it's not just about those things that you can test, right? It's not in math and science and making sure people know how to do their grammar right. That's all really important. But we should have arts education. We should have music in our schools. We should have science that is, more than just kind of how you're going to do on the test, but is actually experimenting and doing those kind of things.
Like a lot of schools have the robotics teams.
And robotics is
that's
a
great
example.
Great example.
And so those are the kind of things that can expand people's minds, not just so they become good workers, but so they see the world from other people's eyes. And that's where we need to get back again.
And that's a big undertaking. We also got to get the cell phones out of their hands.
And out of my hands, unfortunately, too. Yes.
And especially in cars.
Yeah, yes. No, that's for sure.
It's up to 25% now of the accidents are caused by people who are texting or using their cell phones. Yeah. Outrageous.
Yeah.
And we've got to control that.
No, that's absolutely right.
So you're about to embark on many debates and travel around the entire state, and you have a session that's going to come up even with that.
Yeah, in March, late February, sometime like that.
It's good that you got a vacation and got away to Greece a week ago because I'm looking forward to it. Your next year is really going to be an energized year.
No, it is, and it's something that it's actually my favorite part of the job is getting out across the state. I mean, it is a beautiful state, and there's so many amazing things. And one of the things we're trying to do with the campaign, is not just kind of talk about our, the ideas that I have, but really get out and talk to people that are doing some interesting, unique leadership in their communities to kind of rebuild their communities. Because one of the things that is at the heart of my campaign is this belief that it's not just about the state of Minnesota, but it's about what's happening at the local level. And we need to empower local communities more, and I'm really excited about that.
Representative Paul Thissen, 61B, running for governor. Many things more to talk about. Come back.
I will. Thank you.